This is every comic book featuring Spider-Man from 1967, a compilation of all the recaps that I do every Thursday as I try to read every Spider-Man ever. This is also the year where Amazing Spider-Man hit issue 50 and Peter Parker quit being Spider-Man, and it was during this period that I launched my Patreon, where for a few dollars a month you can support what I'm doing here and watch these videos early, as well as get exclusive content. Amazing Spider-Man issue 44. Aunt May is going on holiday and her nephew Peter Parker is seeing her off at the train station and trying to ease her many worries. Also at the train station is Dr. Curt Connors, awaiting the arrival of his wife and kid from Florida, but suddenly he finds himself becoming the evil lizard once more, thanks to chemicals that he inhaled last issue while helping Spider-Man fight the Rhino. When his son spots him mid-transformation, he flees into a train tunnel and fully becomes the lizard once more, making a base behind the tunnel wall. With his aunt safely away, Peter spots a distraught Martha Connors and swings over as Spider-Man to help. She explains her fears about her lizardy husband, and Spidey promises to find him and cure him. But since he has no leads, his next stop takes him to the Daily Bugle with a hope to make some money to help pay for his aunt's trip. He wishes Betty well on her engagement and then haggles with Jonah, agreeing to find some pictures that incriminate Spider-Man in return for some cash. But he doesn't realize that Frederick Foswell is listening in, curious how Peter gets all these Spider-Man photographs and keen to follow our young hero to find out. Peter's next stop is to the Silver Spoon Cafe, where he offers to study with Gwen Stacy before Mary Jane sweeps in and sweeps every guy there off their feet and makes Gwen jealous when she invites Peter out to dance. And as MJ and Peter dance, the lizard scales a building, pun intended, and steals some jewelry to frame Spider-Man. After all, only Spider-Man can climb walls, if you forget about Doc Ock or Electro or all the other villains that we've seen do it. And forget is exactly what the Daily Bugle does, as it prints yet another headline about how criminal Spider-Man is. Looking to clear his name, Spider-Man finds and confronts the lizard on a rooftop, but not without setting up a camera first. When appealing to his humanity fails, Spidey makes the lizard angry enough that he can lure him up a wall for an awaiting crowd to see. "Oh," they cry, "someone else can climb buildings. I guess Spider-Man didn't steal those gems." But Spidey's victory is short-lived when a swinging tail sends him flying off the roof and cuts his webbing, and Spider-Man crashes to the ground hard. Luckily, a doctor is in the crowd to help and wraps Spidey's arm up, telling him that it's just sprained, but that he should try not to use it for a while. With his arm in a sling, Peter pays a visit to Martha Connors, who feels pessimistic that she'll ever see her husband again. He then awkwardly changes back into his civilian clothing and gets home in time to catch a phone call from Aunt May, and to lie to her about how okay he is and how she doesn't have to worry. When that conversation is over, he gets another call from a certain redhead asking him on another date. But he can't be seen in a sling when people know that Spider-Man is also in a sling, and so he turns her down once again. Instead, he sits at home helpless, worried about what the lizard may be up to, worried about his camera, and worried about finding the money to pay for May's trip. And he thinks to himself, maybe he should stop being Spider-Man. Amazing Spider-Man issue 45. Spider-Man's arm is still in a sling and he's hunting for the lizard, and he's worried. Because sure, he can beat up random goons with one arm, but can he also fight a scientist turned evil lizard with one arm? And speaking of that very lizard, he's sneaking into a lab and the home of Curt Connors, unaware that he is also Curt Connors. He's looking for a way to turn lizards into even bigger lizards and raise a lizard army, even though that was nothing close to what Doc Connors was working on. But even though he finds the doctor's notes, the lizard doesn't understand science, and so he trashes the place and leaves. The next morning at the Daily Bugle, Frederick Foswell is keen to follow Peter Parker to discover how he's able to get so many Spider-Man pictures, but he's told to investigate the lizard instead, so that plot point is kicked down the road for a later issue. We're also reminded that Betty and Ned are getting married as they plan it on their coffee break. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Peter Parker is worried that if he appears out in public with a damaged arm, people will connect him to Spider-Man. But any other option is too painful, so he bites the bullet and lies, claiming to have had a motorbike accident. Flash instantly connects the two injured arms, but only to mock Peter Parker, because there's no way that puny Parker could be Spider-Man. And Harry invites Peter out to a party that Gwen Stacy is hosting. Why doesn't she invite Peter out herself? Well, he hasn't exactly been around since Mary Jane arrived on the scene. And that's true, Peter thinks, but he just can't get Gwen out of his mind. Later, and as Spider-Man, Peter swings around the city in search of his scaly enemy. The rooftops and the sewers reveal nothing, but a poster at the zoo about the world's largest reptile collection, located in Philadelphia, gives him all the answers he needs. He finds and confronts the lizard at the train yards, and just as Spidey seems to be getting the upper hand, the lizard releases a menagerie of lizards and commands them to kill Spider-Man. Elsewhere, Mary Jane and her aunt pop around to Peter's house with an offering of soup, but find him gone. Just where could that wallflower be? The answer is using a crocodile as a flail to keep snakes and other crocs at bay. When the lizards abruptly stop attacking, Spider-Man realizes that the train to Philadelphia is leaving, and he leaps on board and brings the fight to the lizard. The train also gives him an idea. He mocks and enrages the lizard once more, just like he successfully did last issue, and leads the villain down the train to a specific carriage. Once inside the carriage, Spider-Man keeps on the offensive, even with just one arm, in the hope that the lizard doesn't realize where he is too early. Finally, in close quarters, the lizard gets a good swing of his tail and hits Spidey, but the attack is feeble, and Lizard falls down unconscious. You see, they're inside the freezer car, and famously cold-blooded reptiles are unable to survive in that temperature. To ensure that Doc Connors doesn't die, Spidey wraps him up in webbing and then swings him to his lab. As the lizard warms, Spider-Man races to create a cure, trying to ignore Martha Connors and her son banging on the door outside. The lizard begins to stir, and Spidey only has one shot, and so he feeds the solution to the lizard and hopes that it works. Hopes that it's a man who breaks free of the webbing and not a lizard. From outside, Martha and Billy hear Spider-Man bidding them inside that there's someone there who would like to see them, and we learn that the formula did work, and that the Connors family are reunited. As he heads home, Peter is deep in thought, interrupted by Harry and Mary Jane pulling up alongside him. They end up leaving him to his thoughts, and Peter begins to sour on MJ, who only seemed to care that she had someone to drive her around. How could he love someone so shallow? He also worries about paying for May's holiday, and worries that his sling will worry May upon her return, and worries that he should be studying instead of swinging around. In an empty room, he yells that all his problems are caused by Spider-Man, and he throws his costume across the room in anger and sits down on the bed to ponder. Why does he even do something that makes him so miserable? Elsewhere and happier, Doc Connors wishes that he could repay Spider-Man in some way. But how could they possibly help someone so powerful and so self-sufficient? A person like Spider-Man probably has everything a man could want. Amazing Spider-Man issue 46. Our hero, with his arm still in a sling, is innocently swinging around the city when the wall that he's perched on starts vibrating and throws him off. Curious, Spidey sets up his camera and heads inside to find a brand new villain who calls himself the Shocker mid-bank robbery. The Shocker uses his vibration technology to effectively punch Spider-Man from across the room, and when Spidey tries to return the favor, he finds that the Shocker's suit also vibrates to soften our hero's blows. The Shocker is finally close enough to twin punch, and the resulting vibration energy knocks Spider-Man down, and the Shocker flees with his money. Peter pulls himself up from the rubble and licks his wounds, sad to have been defeated and wondering how he can ever win against the Shocker, even if he did have two arms working. At least he took some photographs of the fight. As he limps over to the Daily Bugle to sell these pictures, Harry Osborn drives up and offers a lift. He has an offer for Peter. His dad is paying for an apartment close to college, and it has 2 bedrooms. Would Peter be up for being his roommate? Peter leaps at the chance, but has to check with Aunt May first. Reaching the Bugle, they leave each other, with Harry inviting Peter and MJ on a double date with him and Gwen. And that's what Peter is thinking about as he heads inside the Bugle, thinking about how he can't stop thinking about Gwen. And he doesn't notice Frederick Foswell, who is still deeply curious about how Peter Parker, of all people, gets photographs of Spider-Man. So Peter goes inside, sells his photographs of the Shocker, and comes outside, and he doesn't notice that Foswell is disguised as Patch and is tailing him. Meanwhile and elsewhere, the Shocker is counting his stolen money and recounting his backstory to himself, like villains are wont to do. He was just a lowly safecracker and was caught and sent to prison. He decided that he'd never be caught again, so he spent his time in prison working on a vibrating technology to open safes and a special padded suit to protect himself, and called himself the Shocker. All he has to do is press the buttons on his gauntlets, and the vibration power is his to control. And elsewhere once more, Peter Parker is at Penn Station to pick up his Aunt May, who's returning from her holiday in Florida. She has something she would like to tell Peter, and Peter has something that he would like to tell her, and it turns out that those two things are very similar. You see, Aunt May tells Peter that Anna Watson has invited May to live with her, but she's worried about leaving poor Peter alone. And that's great news, as Peter explains about Harry's offer, and they agree that it's time for both of them to live somewhere new. Peter swaps May with MJ, leaving his aunt with Anna and driving MJ to the Silver Spoon to celebrate his new home. When they arrive, Peter spots a beautiful woman dancing and is shocked to discover that it's Gwen. Even MJ can't help but be impressed. At the cafe, Peter learns that Flash's farewell party is all set, and he tells Harry the good news about moving in, and then leaves to go pack. And by pack, I mean that he changes into Spider-Man in an alleyway. But as he goes to leave the alleyway, he spots Patch, secretly Foswell, and realizes that if Patch saw him going into the alley as Parker and leave as Spider-Man, that he'll know his secret identity. And that's exactly what Patch is thinking, that he's figured it out, that Parker is Spider-Man. At least, he thinks that until he hears two voices in the alleyway arguing over money. It turns out that Spider-Man tells Peter Parker where he'll be, and they split the money 50-50. What he's actually hearing is a one-man play put on by Peter, pulling the mask up and down to change his voices. He then uses webbing and his costume to make it look like Spider-Man is swinging away while Peter stands in the alley. It's a performance that's convincing enough to fool Foswell. On a rooftop, after Foswell leaves, Spidey removes his sling. His arm isn't completely better, but he can't keep babying himself. He confronts the Shocker in a bank, and the Shocker is immediately on the offensive, sending Spidey tumbling from a balcony and needing a web cushion to save him. Spider-Man is able to grab the Shocker, but the villain soon vibrates himself free, and our hero resorts to dodging and swinging ineffective punches. But just as Shocker is about to hit Spidey with a double shock blast, Spider-Man webs up his hands. Specifically, he webs up his thumbs so that the Shocker is no longer able to press the buttons on his gauntlet. Spider-Man is able to then knock Shocker unconscious, remove those very gauntlets, and leave the Shocker for the police to find. The next day is moving day, and Peter is excited. Aunt May, on the other hand, is crying, and she makes Peter promise to call and to visit and to take care of himself. She reminds Peter why he should never let her know that he's Spider-Man. Peter arrives at his brand new apartment just as Harry is leaving. Instead of unpacking, Peter stands, sad and alone, and wonders whether becoming Spider-Man has made him incapable of happiness. Fantastic Four issue 61. 3 of the Fantastic Four have just come back from defeating Doctor Doom when their own gadgets begin to turn against them. First, it's an atom igniter that begins to fire at our heroes, knocking the thing down and stopped by Sue's force field being placed around it, getting the gun to destroy itself. Then an anti-gravity disc attaches itself to the thing and begins spinning him in the air, hoping for the centrifugal force to kill him, until Reed is able to shut the gadget off. How is any of this happening? As they ponder this question, a powerless Silver Surfer is being held captive in Latveria and being mocked with pictures of space. But just as all hope feels lost, his cosmic surfboard returns to him, and the Silver Surfer explodes free, vowing vengeance and turning his back on the human race. With one blast, he destroys the castle he was being held in. Back at the Baxter building and worried that someone might be tampering with his space-time chamber, Reed and the others race through the building, but find themselves trapped in a room full of sand. It rises and rises, almost drowning them, until the thing is able to smash through a wall and save the team. But the sand begins to form once more into the Sandman, wearing a new suit that he designed. He attacks these Fantastic Three with hammer fists, and Sue takes that opportunity to turn invisible and sneak away to find a speed blower. But her footprints show up in the sand, and the Sandman activates a chemical in his new suit to make his sand slippery, and Sue falls. Angry that his wife was hurt, Reed punches the Sandman, and the Sandman scatters, but they realize too late that the thing has landed against the space-time generator lever, and one wrong move could destroy the city. Elsewhere, with the Inhumans, Crystal doesn't want to be hidden away from society. She wants to be with the man she loves, with Johnny Storm. She begs to be allowed out into the world, and Black Bolt agrees. She uses Lockjaw the dog to teleport to him, and a bunch of football fans at an ESU game, including Peter Parker and Mary Jane, are shocked to see a strange girl and an even stranger dog just appear out of nowhere in the middle of a football field. But she's too late. The Human Torch is already on his way to help in the fight against the Sandman. Johnny Storm arrives to find the Thing trapped and unable to move, and the Sandman hiding in the space-time chamber. As the Human Torch, he blasts through the walls into the chamber, but is snuffed out by the Sandman. Reed is able to rescue Johnny, but the next time Johnny uses fire on the Sandman, the villain activates another chemical in his new suit, turning his sand particles into liquid nitrogen, release a poisonous gas when heated. Reed and Johnny are suffocating and are going to die. There is only one solution, one last-ditch play. Reed opens the door to the negative zone, and the suction from the zone pulls away all of the poisonous gas. The Sandman, to avoid getting sucked into this strange dimension, leaps out of a window and forgets his fight with the Fantastic Four. But Reed isn't so lucky, and he's pulled through into the negative zone, and the door slams shut behind him. The other three can only watch helpless, no way to reach their friend, as a screen shows Reed float through the negative zone, moments away from death. Amazing Spider-Man issue 47. We start this issue in the past, mid Spider-Man and Kraven fight, and we learn that the Green Goblin has been watching all along, and that Kraven has been offered $20,000 to defeat Spider-Man. After fighting Spider-Man to a standstill, Kraven hopes to get half of that money up front, but is denied by Green Goblin's messenger, Norman Osborn. Angry at being denied, Kraven follows this messenger to his home, hoping to find the Green Goblin. He doesn't. Instead, he just finds Norman Osborn and is unaware that Norman is actually the Goblin that he's been searching for. He then fights Spider-Man, like we've seen, and goes to jail, like we've seen. And now he's swearing vengeance on Norman Osborn after finding out that the Green Goblin died in a fire. Does this flashback make sense? Absolutely not, but the plot is going to require us to just roll with it, so we'll just roll with it. So what is Norman Osborn, the target of Kraven's ire, doing now? Well, he's visiting his son and Peter to see the new apartment and to offer Peter a job whenever he wants one. He then lets Harry know that he's on his way out of the country. And that's something that Kraven also learns when he visits Osborn's office. So while he waits for his quarry to return, he works on a double-barreled ray that shoots from the eyes of the lion that he wears, and definitely not from his nipples. Elsewhere at college, Gwen Stacy tells Peter to invite MJ to Flash's farewell party. Peter responds with flirting and asking her to study with him, but Gwen barely gives him the time of day. Why can't he get her out of his mind? Later, Peter swings to the Bugle to invite Betty and Ned to the party and to sell photographs of the Shocker from the last issue. He catches Jonah talking to his son, who has been approved to go back into space, a plot point that will take a very long time to pay off. Elsewhere, Kraven arrives at Norman Osborn's mansion, but finds only his butler inside. When the butler tells him that Norman is traveling, Kraven's highly trained animal senses informs him that the butler is being truthful, so he just wrecks the place and leaves as the butler calls Norman to warn him. And then, we're finally at Flash's leaving party, as people wish him well joining the army. MJ and Pete hit it off on the dance floor, and Gwen gets tired of being the host and hits the dance floor too. All eyes are on her, especially the eyes of Peter Parker, who is distraught that he never gave her the time of day. And then Kraven smashes through the wall of the party, looking for the son of Norman Osborn, looking for Harry. As Flash Thompson heroically tries to intervene, Peter sneaks away to call the police and arrives back as Spider-Man in time to see Kraven carrying Harry out of the building. Spidey taunts Kraven, getting him so angry that he forgets about Harry and leaves him on the ground. Spidey continues to fight as Flash and Gwen carry Harry to safety, as Mary Jane is enraptured by the fight, and as Ned and Betty call Jonah at the Bugle. Hearing the news that Kraven might beat up Spider-Man, Jonah races across town to witness the fight for himself. And, hearing that his son might be in danger, Norman Osborn does the same, paying the cab driver triple his usual fare to get him there as quickly as possible. Spider-Man seems to have the upper hand in the fight, much to Jonah's dismay, but Kraven soon grows weary of fighting our hero with just his bare hands and resorts to his ray weapon that definitely don't come out from the nipples. Spider-Man is struck and weak, and Kraven knocks him to the ground. He's just about to deliver a final blow when he spots someone arriving on the scene in a taxi. Norman Osborn. So instead of killing Spider-Man, he ropes up Norman and pulls him up into the building site they're fighting on. But Norman genuinely doesn't know the Green Goblin. Kraven's animal senses know that he's not lying, and Kraven has already defeated Spider-Man, so he leaves, claiming victory. all would be well, except that as Norman tries to stand, he's still tied up and he tumbles off the edge and begins to fall. Spider-Man, regaining his senses, swings to the rescue and brings him safely to the ground before fleeing and returning as Peter. And Peter is just in time to wish Flash a genuine farewell, sad that he couldn't tell Flash, the biggest Spider-Man fan in the world, who Spider-Man was under the mask. But he'll still be able to, right? Flash will come back from the war, right? Strange Tales issue 156. Nick Fury is under arrest in his quarters, and Agent Bronson is taking charge of an experimental ship designed by Tony Stark called the Dinosaur. He needs to rush Laura Brown to medical help as she lies on death's door, injured in the previous issue. But S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't know that Agent Bronson can't be trusted, and that he is responsible for Laura Brown's fate when she almost discovered his identity, that he's the Supreme Hydra. Oh, and he's gonna steal that cool new ship too. Elsewhere, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents are meeting. Jasper Sitwell is showing Gabe Jones and Dum Dum Duggan the latest tech, including goggles that let you see through walls, a coin that doubles as a flashbang, and a capsule that turns you invisible. After making a very solid pun, they watch with unease as Agent Bronson flies away before going to check on Nick Fury. But as they reach Nick Fury's room, it explodes in fire. Nothing could have survived the inferno. Nick Fury is dead. Elsewhere, the Supreme Hydra arrives at Hydra Island, a secret island in the ocean, protected, ironically, by a shield around it. Confident in his plan, the Supreme Hydra heads inside, commanding his agents to revive Laura with the antidote. He is getting ready to make a big announcement, but he doesn't know that Nick Fury didn't die in a fire, that he is actually suspected all along, and is on board the Dinosaur, and that he's here to save the day. Elsewhere, using technology to hack into every TV screen, the Supreme Hydra makes an announcement to the world. A world that includes every superhero, including our favorite, Spider-Man. Hydra have germ weaponry that they plan to unleash. If a country swears undying loyalty to Hydra, they will be saved. If anyone tries to approach the base from the outside, the weapon will be activated early. The world has 1 hour to decide. With his announcement made, the Supreme Commander leaves to remove this silly Agent Bronson disguise and take his real form. Meanwhile, we jump across to Nick Fury, and he's fighting his way to the center of the base. When a scuffle with one guard sends a gun flying, Nick Fury is forced to leap into a group of 5, fighting them all to unconsciousness, but not before one of them gets a short message of warning off. Nick uses his new goggles to see through the walls and into the base, and sees something that shocks him. But before he can take action, he is shot from behind and stunned. Regaining consciousness and tied down to machinery, Nick Fury learns the real identity of the Supreme Hydra. It's Baron Strucker, the Nazi commander that he fought decades ago in World War II. Daredevil issue 27. Daredevil is swinging around the city in search of Stiltman, who escaped in the previous issue. Instead of his quarry, Daredevil finds Spider-Man instead, in combat with 3 carjackers. Daredevil leaps into the fray, not to save Spider-Man exactly, but just to help. But Spidey doesn't appreciate the assistance. He can't have this city think that he can't beat up 3 thugs by himself, so Daredevil leaves, but not before asking Spider-Man to keep an eye out for a man on stilts. Speaking of Stiltman, he's with the Masked Marauder in a secret base. The Masked Marauder shows him his new helicopter, which has a force field around it that can destroy anything that touches it. In response, Stiltman shows off his stilts that let him get really tall really quickly. The 2 villains team up with a plan to capture those lawyers that seem to have some connection to Daredevil. And so, we find Stiltman at the offices of Nelson and Murdock, and he floods the room with gas. Because of his heightened sense of smell, Matt Murdock is the first to fall unconscious, but his friends soon fall too, and they're all captured and taken on board that force field helicopter we saw before. On board, the Masked Marauder demands to know the identity of Daredevil, and Matt Murdock instantly caves. Daredevil is Mike Murdock, his twin brother. Look, it's a lot to get into, but during this time, to keep his identity a secret, Matt made up a secret twin brother, and everyone thinks that this twin brother, Mike Murdock, is Daredevil. Just go with it. Karen Page is angry that Matt would just give up his brother like that, and the Masked Marauder sends Stiltman to find this Mike and capture him. Stiltman tries the phone book first, but what with Mike not being a real person, he doesn't exist in the phone book. So Stiltman decides to rob a store, hoping that his crime will lure Daredevil out of the woodwork. And a hero does come to apprehend him, but the wrong one. It's Spider-Man! Stiltman raises really high up on his stilts to escape the web slinger, but Spidey swings up high and punches. Back on the helicopter, and Matt is looking for a way to escape. The perfect opportunity presents itself when the Masked Marauder announces that he's going to throw them all out and into the force field. Since Matt gave up his brother, he'll get the mercy of going first. Matt pretends that he doesn't want to die before slamming into the Marauder, knocking him into the switch that controls the force field and switching it off. And then, when the Masked Marauder shoots at him, he moves his hands into the way, splits the rope with the bullet, leaps out of the helicopter, swings underneath the vehicle while changing out of his clothes, and emerges on the other side as Daredevil. Ta-da! The two men fight, and Daredevil realizes that he recognizes the Marauder's heartbeat. He knows who this villain is. The fight pushes the Marauder into the control panel, and the helicopter is suddenly flying upside down. Just as the Masked Marauder shoots at Daredevil, our hero reveals his name, Frank Farnham, the office manager for Nelson and Murdoch. Frank switches on the force field once more, angry that his name has been revealed, but Daredevil moves quickly with a punch to stop him and accidentally sends the villain through an open door and into that force field that was just switched on before Daredevil can switch it off. The Masked Marauder is disintegrated. Elsewhere, Stiltman has stunned Spidey with a gas canister and wades out into the water to return to the helicopter. There, he finds Daredevil, the man that he was looking for, hanging underneath. He pulls out a weapon at the hero and fires, but it's an electronic weapon and he's standing in the water and he short circuits. His legs begin to shrink. With no electricity, they can't work, and he falls into the water, and the villains are defeated. Amazing Spider-Man issue 48. While Spider-Man is out in the snow and the cold searching for Kraven, because it would be just terrible for Kraven to think that he beat Spider-Man, an inmate is on his deathbed. Adrian Toombs, known to us as the Vulture, was involved in an accident in the prison workshop. With his dying breaths, he calls for his cellmate and his wish is granted. After all, he's dying. His cellmate is Blackie Drago, and he's been pestering the Vulture to learn where he keeps his wings for months. And since he's dying, Adrian tells him the wings are kept 500 yards from the North Gun Tower, close to the prison. With the location revealed, Blackie laughs and reveals that the accident wasn't an accident, that he orchestrated it to find the location of the wings, and then he leaves Adrian Toombs helpless, injured, and dying in bed. Adrian closes his eyes for the last time. With knowledge of the wings' location, Blackie ambushes a driver and escapes prison in their car. The prison alarm sounds as he makes his getaway, but they're too late. He's uncovered the wings. By the time the guards reach him, he's airborne, and even though the wings take a little getting used to, Blackie soon soars to freedom. The next day, and due to his winter search out in the snow, Peter Parker is sick. He's too sick to flirt with Gwen Stacy, and he's even too sick to do science, and so his teacher sends him home. On the sofa, Peter watches Jonah on the news, blaming Spider-Man for Kraven's escape, and then he sees different news about a new Vulture in town. He briefly considers calling Daredevil to let him know to handle it, what with how ill he is, but he decides that Spider-Man knows how to defeat the Vulture the best, and it's up to him. If only he could stop himself shivering. As Peter suits up as Spider-Man, the new Vulture is on a crime spree. He's smashing into jewelry stores and snatching payroll deliveries. When he swoops down to steal bonds, he finds that his victim has handcuffed the suitcase to himself, and so he takes the man hostage, flying him to the highest building around. If he drops the man from here, the suitcase is bound to break open. But he doesn't get the chance as Spider-Man is crawling up the building and jumps up with a flying leap and punches the new Vulture off the rooftop. Spider-Man then safely brings the hostage down to the ground. But wait, Spidey thinks. He didn't hear the Vulture hit water, and that thought is interrupted by an attack that Spider-Man narrowly avoids. But he does manage to get a web hold of his flying foe, and he's dragged through the sky and spun around and slammed into a bridge. It's always a bridge with Spider-Man. As he holds on to the wiring, Spider-Man starts to feel dizzy, his cold getting the better of him, and he falls unconscious and off the bridge to his doom. As our hero plummets, we jump elsewhere to Mary Jane, Aunt May and Anna, who are worried about Peter. They arrive at his apartment to be told by Harry that Peter hasn't come home, and that he must just be chilling at the Silver Spoon. And so MJ and Harry agree to drop off their elders and meet Peter there. But Peter isn't chilling, he's falling, and he's definitely not at the Silver Spoon. Without knowing that he's saving Spider-Man's life, the Vulture swoops down and grabs him in a chokehold, startling him awake. As they fly towards a flagpole, Spidey breaks Vulture's grip, swings around and kicks his bird-like foe, landing safely on a wall. But his head is swimming, and he really shouldn't have come out feeling like he does in this cold weather, and he slips unconscious and falls down into the snow. The Vulture has won and leaves our hero for dead. Amazing Spider-Man issue 49. Spider-Man is dying in the snow, and his whole life is flashing before his eyes. All the people he fought and all the people who loved him. In the last issue, he fought a new Vulture while sick, and he lost, and the Vulture has left him to die. But then his finger twitches, and then he starts to rise. He's groggy and still sick, but he's alive. The cold snow has revived him. He climbs down carefully from the rooftop and staggers his way home, climbing through the window and jumping into bed just before Harry comes in. He is sick and he needs to get better. Elsewhere, Kraven is jealous that the Vulture is claiming to have defeated Spider-Man. He's so jealous that he wrestles a tiger to show the world how strong he is, the most Kraven thing he could possibly do, and then he vows vengeance on this new Vulture. Meanwhile, Aunt May is visiting her sick nephew with Aunt Anna, because yeah, it's probably just a cold, and yeah, he's already resting up, but she still sees Peter as this frail little boy. Inside his bedroom, Peter desperately tries to keep his covers drawn up, hiding the Spider-Man costume that he's still wearing underneath. May frets and then leaves to call the doctor, and Peter sighs with relief and quickly removes the incriminating costume. Funny, he almost feels completely better now. Elsewhere and in the skies of New York, the new Vulture is on a crime spree, and he flies up to hijack a helicopter. He kicks the vehicle and threatens to do it again unless a passenger inside hands over some diamonds. His threat works, and he gets the diamonds and he flies away, unaware that he has been watched by Kraven the Hunter. Back with Peter, and he has new visitors this time, Mary Jane and Gwen. They're told that Peter is resting, and that MJ's plan to just play loud music is perhaps not the kindest, medicinally, and Harry escorts the two ladies outside. In his bedroom, Peter broods. Here he is, pretending to be sick now, and he doesn't even get to see the pretty ladies. And back to those New York skies, and the Vulture is suddenly lassoed and pulled down to earth by Kraven. The two grapple with one another, and the Vulture tries to fly once more. However, Kraven is holding onto his leg, and he shifts his weight and forces the two of them to crash down through a skylight and into a building, all part of his plan. And Peter Parker hears all about this on the radio, and so he suits up as Spider-Man. He arrives to find the building is a jungle exhibition, the perfect hunting grounds for Kraven, and that Kraven has added a net across the top to stop the Vulture from flying away. It's pretty smart. Peter sets up his camera and joins the fray. He takes on both villains at once. He punches both with a dive and kicks Kraven away and swings the Vulture by the wings into a tree. Even when the two work together, with Kraven holding Spidey and Vulture punching him from the skies, they're not enough to stop this newly revived Spider-Man. As a last resort, Kraven turns to his definitely not nipple rays and shoots them at our hero, but the Wallcrawler has arranged the fight so that he can leap away and the rays knock the Vulture out of the sky instead. Spider-Man is then able to rip the weapon from Kraven's chest and delivers the type of punch he used on the Hulk. And since Kraven is not the Hulk, he collapses on the ground. Defeated. Spidey takes some pictures of the defeated villains before racing home and hopping back into bed, exactly 3 minutes and 22 seconds before the doctor arrives. He gives Peter a clean bill of health. It must have been some 24-hour virus, and tells May that he's very much not a frail boy. She thinks that the doctor is joking. Healthy once more, Peter takes May and Anna out to the movies. After all, he could really use some excitement. Amazing Spider-Man issue 50. Our tale begins in the middle of the action. Spider-Man is fighting off 4 men, dodging bullets and ending the fight definitively with the slam of a door. One woman is grateful that he saved the payroll, but her partner is wary, yelling at Spider-Man to keep his distance. That's just great, Spidey thinks. He's out here helping people and they hate him for it. Back as Peter Parker, and his problems only mount. He finds out that Aunt May is ill and sedated, and that she was calling out for Peter, but he just wasn't there for her. Then, the next day, his college professor keeps him behind to explain that his grades are slipping. If only he was around more and had more time to devote to his studies. And then Gwen Stacy invites him to a little get-together, and he's been wanting that for ages, but his grades are now slipping and his aunt is now ill, and so he'll have to turn her down. Being Spider-Man means that he just doesn't have time for anything else. Not even that job that Harry's dad offered him. And to top it all off, he's wearing the itchiest looking sweater ever made. Can things get any worse? Yes, they can. As Peter arrives home, he's confronted on the TV by J. Jonah Jameson. Jonah is offering a $1,000 reward for his capture. According to Jonah, Spider-Man's an egomaniac and a menace and a fraud, and maybe he's right, Peter thinks. Perhaps only an egomaniac would do any of this. He wanders out into the rain and contemplates, thinks about how being Spider-Man has brought him nothing but unhappiness. Did he really care about stopping crime, or did he just love the thrill of the battle, the taste of triumph? The more he thinks about it, the more he's sure that Jonah must be right, and there's only one thing left to do. He gives up being Spider-Man forever. The next day, in the newsroom of the Daily Bugle, a young boy enters with a bundle of clothes that he found. In Jonah's office, he reveals it to be Spider-Man's old costume, found in an alleyway. Jonah is ecstatic. He did it! Spider-Man has quit. He puts out a headline, and soon everyone knows that Spider-Man's no more. And soon, Jonah is on the TV to talk about it, and every major channel is covering the news. Spider-Man has gone. The news also reaches the underworld, and criminals begin to react. In a skyscraper, a man named the Kingpin can finally put his plan into action and take over every gang in New York City. And so, the gangs begin to converge, and Frederick Foswell, reporter for the Daily Bugle, ex-crime boss and masked mole called Patch, feels it in the air. The gangs are going to start to work together since Spider-Man is out of the picture, and Frederick Foswell knows the perfect person to lead them. Him as the big man. Later, at the Bugle, Jonah is showing Foswell Spider-Man's costume that he now has framed on his wall as a sign of victory when Peter Parker arrives and hands in his notice. He doesn't need this stinking job anymore. If there's no Spider-Man, there's no need for Spider-Man pictures, and Peter has more important things he can be doing. So Peter's spending time with Aunt May and with Mary Jane as a bonus. He's studying, and he's asking Gwen Stacy out on a date. And he just might accept that job that Norman Osborn offered him. And yes, sure, there's a crime spree going on with the new Kingpin running the underworld like a business. And sure, sometimes Peter springs to take action to stop the crime before realizing that he no longer has his costume. But he's happy now. Without Spider-Man, he has time to be a better person, to be around for the people that he loves. And yet, as he leaves Aunt May's and is riding through the city, he hears a shout from the rooftops. Somebody is in trouble and there's no one around to help. Without thinking, Peter leaps off his bike and runs up the wall to help the man, a security guard being accosted by two crooks. He punches the villains out cold, and then he turns away from the guard to not reveal his face. But the guard looked familiar. He looked like Peter's Uncle Ben, who was shot by a burglar that Peter had failed to stop. Remembering why he became Spider-Man in the first place, Peter realizes that he could never stop being Spider-Man. He can never let one innocent person come to harm because Spider-Man failed to act. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Foswell has taken up the mantle of the big man once more, and he marches into the Kingpin's office. He explains that he's the only one who has the experience and the savvy to rule the gangs, and that the Kingpin can be one of his lieutenants. But then when he pulls out a gun to threaten the Kingpin shoots a disintegrating laser from his cane, and then his men take Foswell hostage. Across the city, J. Jonah Jameson walks into his office to find familiar red feet resting on his desk. It's Spider-Man, wearing the costume that Jonah had on his wall. Spidey tells Jonah that he'd never quit, that he was just out recruiting many more spider people just to annoy Jonah. And he just can't wait to read the retractions that Jonah will be forced to print. Jokes made, Spidey swings out of the window and into the city, a hero once more. Amazing Spider-Man issue 51. The Kingpin has gathered a bunch of mobs together as part of his ruling all the mobs plan, and he's about to launch a campaign of crime. But first, he wants the gangs to take care of J. Jonah Jameson, who is running headlines about the heightened gang activity, and he wants one of the gang leaders, Big Turk, to collect some money from some service stations. It's small work, and Big Turk isn't happy about it, but that kingpin still has a cane that can disintegrate people, so he'll put up with it for now. At least they don't have to worry about Spider-Man anymore. But they quickly discover that they do in fact have to worry about Spider-Man as he swings down and stops the money collection and beats up a bunch of them. Big Turk narrowly escapes in his car while his men are being pummeled. Elsewhere, the Kingpin has a plan for his captive, Frederick Foswell. You know, the man formerly known as the big man of crime, who was then captured by Spidey and then reformed and worked as a journalist for J. Jonah Jameson, while occasionally going undercover as a man called Patch with an eye patch before becoming the big man again to challenge the Kingpin as the ruler of the gangs. That guy. The Kingpin has the perfect job for him. But before he can tell him, Big Turk pushes his way into the office, angry that the Kingpin didn't warn them of Spider-Man's return. The Kingpin has a lesson to teach, and he doesn't even need his special cane. He grabs Big Turk's punch in a vice-like grip and throws him across the room. While people might think he's just a fat man, he's actually pure muscle. With the interruption concluded, the Kingpin tells Foswell that he wants him to help silence J. Jonah Jameson permanently. And speaking of Jonah, we skip over to the Daily Bugle offices where Jonah is trying to get a hold of Frederick Foswell, who's gone missing, and to find a replacement for Peter Parker, who quit last issue. Fortunately for him, Peter is back, hat in hands metaphorically, to get his old job back. His apologies aren't enough, Jonah yells, and he'll never welcome Parker back. Well, until he learns what else Peter has in his hands, physically. Spider-Man pictures. So Peter is rehired and rides off on his motorbike to find Foswell, completely blanking Mary Jane and Gwen and Harry, who are sat in a cafe, to remind the reader that they exist. Peter's search leads him to some suspicious men entering a swanky private club, and he swings in as Spidey when he spots that one of the men is drawing a gun. But the men are prepared for Spider-Man's arrival, and they throw a miniaturized grenade strong enough to stun Spidey and weaken the beams of the building. Spider-Man is able to throw a tracer onto one of the fleeing crooks before bracing under the fallen beam long enough to let everybody escape before he himself dives out of the window. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Jonah is visited by gang members who bundle him into the back of a car blindfolded and deliver him to the Kingpin. The Kingpin's offer is simple: stop reporting on the crime wave. But Jonah refuses, and that might cost him his life. And to make things worse, Kingpin deliberately names Foswell to make sure that Jonah knows that he was betrayed, even while blindfolded, and to make sure that Foswell won't betray them. But before anything truly bad can happen to Jonah, Spidey interrupts the meeting with his signal after following the goons from before. He easily dispatches the Kingpin's henchmen who rush out onto the balcony to stop him, webbing them up and leaving them for the police to find. And it's down to the Kingpin versus Spidey. Our web crawler is able to handily dodge the disintegrating blast from the Kingpin's cane and is able to break it on the ground when he gets hold of it. But like others before him, Spidey underestimates the speed and the strength of the Kingpin, and he pays for it. He's knocked around and pulled from the wall when he leaps up, but Spider-Man eventually gets the upper hand, pinning the Kingpin down. However, the cane wasn't the Kingpin's only trick, and gas shoots out of his collar and sprays Spidey in the face, knocking him out. Spidey is defeated, and Jonah, who has wanted Spider-Man's defeat all along, learns that he never wanted it like this. Not like this. Amazing Spider-Man issue 52. Spider-Man has been beaten by the Kingpin and is carried down into a cellar, followed by J. Jonah Jameson, also the Kingpin's captive. They're both led into a room and manacled in the center, left to drown as water begins to flow in from a pipe and fill the room. Jonah screams for help, desperate to try and wake the unconscious Spider-Man. After being such a thorn in Jonah's side for so long, why does he choose this moment to be unable to help? Fortunately, Spidey starts to stir, and ignoring Jonah continuing to yell at him, he pulls himself free from the manacles with his spider strength. He then sets out to rescue them both by randomly spraying web everywhere. He's gone mad, Jonah thinks. Meanwhile and elsewhere, the Daily Bugle staff are discovering that Jonah is missing. Ned Leeds spots that Jonah's office door is broken and figures that he must have been abducted. He decides to hit the streets to investigate, leaving Robbie to hold down his desk and leaving Betty, his fiancée, worried that every man in her life will run into danger. And so back with Spider-Man, the last man in Betty's life who ran into danger, and his random web shooting is turning into a dome, which is able to get over his head and Jonah's head just as the water rises up to drown them. Outside, the Kingpin's men are convinced that Spider-Man and Jonah are dead, but go inside to find the two of them encased in this webbing dome. Spider-Man leaps out, knocking all the men unconscious and freeing Jonah from his manacles. But Jonah is in shock. While Spider-Man fights off more of the Kingpin's minions, Jonah is frightened stiff, frozen on the spot. Spidey figures that there's only one way to get him moving again, and that's to shock him into escaping. And so he threatens Jonah with violence, and Jonah wakes up long enough to flee, and flees wildly enough that he crashes into some low-hanging piping and knocks himself out. Thinking that Jonah has actually escaped, Spidey heads up the stairs to face off against the main event, the Kingpin. And speaking of the Kingpin, he's in his office with Frederick Foswell, informing Foswell of Jonah and Spidey's fate. They're dead. But Foswell signed up to do crimes and to get rich, not do murders. And his questioning gets the Kingpin angry, yelling that Foswell is either a coward or an undercover agent, and both of those mean that he has to die. But lucky for Foswell, Spidey isn't dead, and he bursts into the office in that moment to save the day. But before any days can be saved, we jump across to the Silver Spoon Cafe, where Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy are welcoming back Flash Thompson, on leave from the army. Flash brags about how important he is to the war effort, all jokey bravado, and then MJ arrives and the two flirt, while everyone wonders where Peter is. As soon as he shows up, they can organize a party for Flash. But Peter is too busy fighting the Kingpin as Spider-Man. He webs up the Kingpin's pin to avoid another gassing, and is prepared for the Kingpin's strength and speed this time. He's dodging, leaping to the ceiling, and hitting hard. As they fight, Foswell grabs a gun from the Kingpin's desk and flees. After Spidey manages to knock the Kingpin to the ground, the Kingpin also flees, escaping through a bookcase. When Spider-Man tries to follow, he's thrown back in an explosion of gas. But he's soon up and chasing the Kingpin down into the cellar. But also in the cellar is Jonah, woken up from unconsciousness by water dripping on his head, and he assumes it's blood. He runs wildly down a corridor until Foswell grabs him and pulls him to safety. Jonah was the only person who ever gave him a second chance, so Foswell owes him. But that price comes due immediately when two of the Kingpin's goons shoot at Jonah and Foswell leaps into the way. Spidey arrives at that very moment, knocking the two men together and knocking them out, but it's too late for Foswell. He dies in Jonah's arms. Outside, Spider-Man can't find the Kingpin. He must have made good his escape for now. Ned Leeds arrives just as they're wheeling Foswell out on a stretcher. Jonah tells him that he wants to do a front-page story about Foswell's noble sacrifice and how he died a hero. And then he wants to do another story about how much of a menace Spider-Man is, because you never know what side he's on. Sometimes he's helping you, sometimes he's threatening to kill you. And up on the rooftop, Spidey can't even bring himself to hate Jonah. While Jonah is a compulsive crank, Spidey is a compulsive do-gooder. That's just the way of things. But he does wish that being a do-gooder paid more. Not Brand Echh, issue 1. It's the Human Scorch, just like the Human Torch, but not the one that you're thinking of, fighting the Sunk Mariner, who's just like the Submariner. And one of them is throwing fish, and they have both been fighting for 39 issues, because this is a comedy comic, full of in-jokes that will be near impossible for me to get across in a recap. The Human Scorch is throwing fireballs at the Sunk Mariner, and the Letterer is throwing old-school lettering at us, until he just can't be bothered to keep up the pace. The Mariner sprays the Scorch with gas, putting his fire out and sending him into the ocean, but they can still smell burning. The Scorch recovers, leans on a wall, melts through it. Spider-Man peeks his head around before he realizes that he's in the wrong comic. And then the Scorch confronts the Mariner at a garlic factory, and they can still smell burning. The Scorch throws a vial of garlic at the Mariner, and the Mariner responds by trapping him in a glass bottle, dousing his flame, and yet they still smell burning. Turns out that the burning smell is Chaplain America, who is burning because he can't stand these corny stories from the Golden Age. Scorch and Mariner are old now. That's why Scorch was replaced by a hotshot teenager, and Mariner had his throne usurped. Won't happen to Cap though, because he stays up with the times. He understands psychology, motivation, and karate. Scorch and the Mariner suddenly feel and look so very old, and they decide to retire, walking down the yellow brick road to freedom. I'm wondering why the Scorch looks old when he's an android and shouldn't age. Later, we see them both retired, alongside legally distinct versions of all of your favourite old comic book characters. X-Men issue 35. In Central Europe, the mutant known as Banshee is searching for an evil organisation known as Factor 3. When a hole opens up on a mountainside, he's sure that he's found his quarry, but he's met inside by a robot spider that zaps him with a paralyzing ray. He's able to make it back to his chalet and send a message to the X-Men, but he passes out before he can complete the whole thing. He is taken by Factor 3, who send a robot to discover how much information he has sent to the X-Men. And the X-Men, they only receive one sentence: beware the spider. Speaking of spiders, just outside of the mansion grounds, Peter Parker is riding around in the countryside on his motorbike. He gets off to explore a stream and an abandoned mill that look interesting, when suddenly an egg lands from the sky. Ducking into the mill, Parker changes into his Spider-Man threads in time to see the egg release a spider robot that instantly attacks our hero. Spider-Man is on the back foot, desperately trying to dodge the spider's lasers, and he's eventually knocked to the ground when the robot shoots away the wall that he's clinging to. Meanwhile, and a little distance away, the X-Men get a warning from Cerebro that a mutant is nearby, and they hop into a fancy Rolls-Royce to investigate. Back with Spidey and Spider, and Spider-Man has managed to lure the robot inside of the mill, where it has less room to maneuver. He's able to get the drop on the mechanical spider, grab its laser eye and redirect it down towards the body of the robot, forcing the robot to destroy itself. Dazed from the fight, he wanders out of the partially destroyed mill and finds the X-Men waiting for him. The X-Men are shocked to find Spider-Man there, but soon start to put the pieces together. He must be the spider that Banshee warned them of, and so they attack, and Spidey is forced to defend himself. He webs up Angel's wings and drops him into the stream, then dodges Beast's attacks and kicks him from a wall, and then he dodges Iceman's attack too. Cyclops is about to jump in, but tries diplomacy first. Spider-Man gives them 10 seconds to explain themselves, but the X-Men just argue with him, and the time runs out, and it soon leads to fighting once more. This time the X-Men surround him and attack at once. Angel leads Spidey into the mill, where the Beast dives at him, and Iceman freezes his feet while Cyclops shoots out his webbing, and Spider-Man tumbles into the stream. However, just as they defeat Spider-Man, the X-Men get a message from Jean Grey, who stayed behind because she's a girl, I guess? She tells them that Cerebro has stopped detecting a mutant presence the moment that the X-Men left, so the Spider-Menace couldn't have been Spider-Man. Spider-Menace, Spidey overhears them say. That was probably the spider that he defeated earlier. The X-Men offer apologies and offer to help him out of the water, but Spider-Man turns them all down and watches his attackers ride off in a fancy car. Back at the mansion, and Jean Grey has located Banshee. The X-Men prepare to travel to Europe to rescue Banshee and the Professor too in issues that don't include Spider-Man, so we don't care about them. Not Brand Echh, issue 2. J. Jawbone Junkton, who looks surprisingly like J. Jonah Jameson, learns that Spidey-Man is in town and he's mad about it. To get away from it all, he visits a diner, but all the specials are about Spidey, and the radio is giving away Spidey-Man posters, so he takes an axe to it and storms out. When he tries a relaxing drive, the lizard runs out of the sewer, chased by Spidey-Man, and they run all over Junkton's car. He can't even get away from the hero at home, since the TV is airing the adventures of Spidey-Man, and when he settles down for some bedtime reading, a Spidey insert pops out at him, and he has had enough. He calls up Gnatman and Rotten for help. Rotten is eager to help, for the fame and the glory, and think of the residuals. And so, after Jawbone works through mountains of legal paperwork, he officially hires the heroes, and he gives them their task: get rid of Spidey-Man. Spidey-Man, Gnatman and Robin yell, but he fights for keeps. But they signed a contract, and they're legally bound to help. They find Spidey on a wall reading. When they try to trip him, at the last moment Spidey ducks to grab a button from the ground, and Gnatman squashes Rotten instead. When they try to hit him with a brick wrapped in a glove, Spidey decides to snooze on a wall above them, and Rotten hits Gnatman instead. When they try a mallet, Spidey is distracted by his aunt dating Doc Ock, and Rotten flattens Gnatman and has to pump him back up. When they try a gas, they just end up fighting each other as Spidey takes pictures from above. But just when Gnatman thinks he'll never beat Spidey-Man, Spidey swings away, but forgets to attach his web to anything and crashes to the ground. Gnatman calls up Jawbone. Spidey-Man is definitely DC, which stands for definitely clobbered and nothing else, and he claims his reward money. Jawbone is happy to be rid of the menace, but the next day he sees Gnatman symbols everywhere, and gets run over by Gnatman and Rotten as they chase a villain, and sees them on the news and swinging outside of his window. He has just replaced one superhero with a worse one. We end the story with Jawbone in the park, searching for Spidey-Man, and Peter Pooper, his alter ego, enjoying his free time with Mary Jane Watson and Gwen Stacy, or whatever nonsense name the comic would give them. Amazing Spider-Man issue 53. Spider-Man is busy hanging out outside the Daily Bugle, just mocking J. Jonah Jameson to pass the time, when he realizes that he's late for college. He swings over the heads of Gwen and Flash, who is excited to see his hero, and into a gym where he changes quick enough to avoid getting caught by his professor, Professor Warren. Warren invites Peter to see a science exhibition and bring a +1, and Peter uses that +1 to invite Gwen Stacy on a date. Peter also learns that Harry is upset with him. Harry is sick of being a social secretary and taking messages for him, while Peter is just never around. And it also seems that Peter and Flash still don't get along. After college, Peter and Gwen and Professor Warren arrive at the exhibition to see a new type of missile defense called a nullifier, which nullifies the homing devices of enemy missiles. It's such a dangerous device if it fell into the wrong hands that it arrives in 2 pieces and is assembled at the venue. But as the demonstration begins, Peter's spidey sense starts to go off and Dr. Octopus stands out of the crowd, here to steal the device. The guards fire tear gas at the Doctor while Peter sneaks away, but Dr. Octopus needs no gas mask. His arms will save him, and they do by spinning around really fast and blowing the gas away. With the gas dispersed, Doc Ock reaches for the guards in anger when Spider-Man swings in to save the day. The two fight like old enemies, and Spider-Man draws the Doctor away from people and up onto the rooftop. There, Spidey sprays Otto in the eyes. Blinded and unable to fight back, Doc Ock drops the nullifier off the building. If it hits the ground, it will kill onlookers below, and Spider-Man is forced to make a choice. Quickly throwing a tracer onto the dock, Spidey leaps after the nullifier and stops it moments before collision. When he gets back to the rooftop, Doc Ock has fled. And as Dr. Octopus flees, he recounts the last time he faced Spider-Man, back in issue 33. They fought in an underwater base, and while Spidey used the memory of his Uncle Ben to lift his way out, Doc Ock used the more traditional method of having scuba gear nearby, and he just swam to safety. In the present day and back at a secret base, the Doctor discovers something on his back. The tracer that Spider-Man put there. It looks like it's time for Doc Ock to turn the tables on his enemy. We're then back with Peter, who is Peter again, and meeting up with Gwen Stacy and his professor. He starts to lie that he was looking for a camera to shoot the action, but Gwen doesn't care about where he was, only that he's back now. They head to the Coffee Bean, where they meet up with MJ and Flash and a frosty Harry Osborn. They also meet up with Aunt May and Aunt Anna, who are planning to rent out a room in their home to a boarder. Peter takes his aunt's arrival as an opportunity to walk his aunt home and then sneak away to find Dr. Octopus. But little does he know that Doc Ock has a plan for him. The Doctor has set up a fake Doc Ock and placed the tracer next to it. And Spider-Man is fooled to start with. He goes to the warehouse and thinks he's found Doc Ock, but his spider sense just won't quit, and on closer inspection, he notices that his tracer is attached to a chair, and it can't crawl yet. To be on the safe side, Spidey sends a ball of webbing into the building in his place, and dives for cover. The ball triggers the trap, and the building explodes. Elsewhere, watching on a monitor, Doc Ock celebrates the death of Spider-Man. Now he just needs to find a safer hiding place, since federal agents will be out there and looking for him. And a tease for the next issue suggests that he does find a place. At Aunt May's house? Not Brand Echh issue 3. Let's get this out of the way. Spider-Man only appears once in this entire issue, in a phone booth in the back of the very first panel. That's it. But that counts, so we're making a video on it. Anyway, Charlie America's origin story hasn't been reprinted in a number of weeks, so he sits down with Knock Furious and tells him the story over milkshakes. He was a regular teenager called Speedy, pretending to be 7 years old with a newspaper route that was vital to the war effort to avoid being drafted. However, he is soon kidnapped by some secret agents and dragged to the back of a candy store, where Wondrous Woman and the Joker as a doctor strap him down and turn him into a super soldier. Zap! It succeeds. He's now Charlie America. But it turns out that one of the spies is actually a Nazi who wants to stop Speedy from fighting the Nazi menace. But Charlie America wants no such thing. He's more interested in selling weight loss ads than fighting, and he hides in a bin while the Nazi spy kills the Doctor. When the villain then shoots at the bin, Charlie America throws the lid to knock him out, and everyone just assumes that he meant to do that, and the bin lid becomes his shield and his symbol. Captain America ends up joining the war effort anyway, where his secret identity is discovered by Bunky Barnes, who blackmails the hero into letting him be a sidekick. And so they fight together as an inseparable team before they faced by Baron Zero and a wooden plane with a bomb on it. Bunky jumps on the plane to disarm the bomb and gets trapped, and Charlie leaps to save him, but the plane explodes, killing Bunky, and Charlie America falls into the ocean and freezes. Years later, when comic book sales have picked up, he's discovered and revived, broken out of the ice by the Revengers. But it's a shame you never caught Baron Zero, Nack says. Now back to the start of the story, but Charlie America did, when he was in South America. But, surprise, that was actually a robot, and Nack Furious is actually Baron Zero in disguise. But Charlie America also has a surprise. He's not Charlie, he's Bunky Barnes instead, who didn't die on that plane at all. In the end, they decide not to fight each other. Baron Zero enjoys all the perks of being the head of Sheesh, and Bunky enjoys not having Charlie to boss him around and getting to stay up late. Instead, they stay in the diner and drink hundreds of milkshakes. The Amazing Spider-Man Annual Issue 4. The Human Torch has gone wild, terrorizing passers-by with his flame and burning through armored vans. Hearing the screams, Spider-Man swings in to help. He spins the torch up in webbing, and the torch replies with a netting of flame. Spider-Man counters that by pulling a hydrant out of the ground and drenching the Human Torch. Even without flame, the torch is angry and charges at Spidey, but the clash is stopped by the director calling the torch off. The director? That's right, once again Spider-Man has interrupted a movie shoot. The Human Torch wasn't really going wild, he was acting, and now Spider-Man has ruined it. The humiliating act is caught on camera and featured in the Daily Bugle, and it gives a mysterious man a dangerous idea. Later, Peter Parker is at home when he hears a radio announcement. A movie studio wants to make a new film starring Spider-Man and the Human Torch, and so our hero takes a plane to Hollywood and signs up as Spider-Man, hoping to make enough money to take Gwen on a date. But in a shadowy room, two villains are gloating that Spider-Man has just taken the bait. On the morning of the first day of shooting, Spider-Man bumps into Johnny Storm. Since they're now co-stars in a movie, they call a truce, and the Human Torch gives Spidey a lift to set. The first scene they're shooting is an alien invasion, but Spider-Man's Spidey sense starts going off. He soon understands why when the Human Torch dives towards him and starts menacing the set. He is strangely quiet though. Spidey puts a stop to the Torch's rampage with a light reflector to the head, and the Torch flees outside where Spider-Man loses track of him. With no other leads, Spidey decides to check the Torch's trailer. He rips the wall off rather than knocking to find a very surprised Johnny Storm reading a script. You see, the reason that he's surprised is that it wasn't Johnny menacing the set. It was the Wizard, using anti-grav discs to fly and flame jets with an asbestos suit to look like the fiery hero. He's teamed up with Mysterio, and they've started their own film studio just to get these two enemies to fight each other. And the plan is working. They are fighting each other. Spider-Man doesn't ask any questions of Johnny. He just starts punching, and Johnny responds in kind. They trade blows and fireballs and asbestos blankets before they both notice a camera in the ceiling. Before they start putting the pieces together, Mysterio activates a gas that douses Johnny and starts to put his flame out. But Spider-Man is able to jam up the nozzles with his web, allowing the torch just enough flame to burn the rest of the gas away. Together, they blast into a control room and confront the villains, Mysterio and the Wizard, only to find out that they're holograms, and that the real villains are escaping into the skies on a weird jet device. Our heroes give chase, with Spidey webbed to the Torch's feet. They fly over some trees and come face to face with a giant ape. The ape knocks the Human Torch out of the air, and we learn that he's being controlled by the Wizard. Spidey figures it out too, that he's facing a robot, and leaps onto the ape's back and smashes the mechanism inside. But not before the ape has grabbed Johnny. With the robot shut down, Johnny is trapped in the ape's vice-like grip, unable to breathe. Spider-Man is his only hope, so Spider-Man pulls with all of his strength, finger by finger, until he is able to free his ally. Johnny can breathe once more. Spidey then goes back to investigate the robot ape and finds some magnetically activated fluid that he saves for later. After searching the area around the defeated ape, Spidey and the Torch discover Mysterio and the Wizard in a cave. They swing and fly in, but they are trapped by glass doors slamming shut. With a switch, the Wizard begins to bombard our heroes with rocks, magnetized to pull towards Spidey and the Torch. While Spidey dodges an onslaught, the Human Torch attempts to burn his whole body through the glass, but simply slams into it for his effort. Spidey tells him to concentrate his flame on a smaller area of the glass instead, and doing so creates a hole, which is just large enough for Spidey to shoot his new magnet webs through, and he's able to reverse the rocks so that they slam back into the villains instead. The Wizard and Mysterio lay defeated, and Spidey webs them up. Minutes later, the press are on the scene, asking Spider-Man if he'll ever team up with the Human Torch again. But Spidey says the last thing he ever needs is a partner. What he needed was the money that the movie was going to pay him, to help pay for a plane fare home. But it looks like he's out of luck. That is, until the Torch mentions the reward for catching the villains, who are wanted in half the states in the US. And so our hero gets a flight home, and he rests. Amazing Spider-Man issue 54. Dr. Octopus thinks that Spider-Man is dead, and he's looking for a place to lie low. It just so happens that Aunt May is looking for a lodger, and she's excited to be reunited with that nice scientist that she visited a while back. But didn't she hear that Doc Ock was a wanted man? Oh, of course not. That was a misunderstanding. It was Spider-Man that was the criminal, and Doc Ock was just trying to stop him. With that silly misunderstanding sorted, Doc Ock takes residence in May's house and hatches a deadly plot in her bedroom to get the nullifier back that he failed to get last issue. While Spider-Man swings around the city with no idea where this villain has got to before retiring back to his apartment and giving Aunt May a call. Later, as Peter is working on his webbing, he hears Harry Osborn come home. Realizing that so much of his secret identity is on display, Peter rushes to hide everything. But Harry, who is annoyed already by Peter not being around, is further annoyed that Peter is locking away all of his stuff every time that Harry enters the apartment. Doesn't Peter trust Harry? Shaking off that cold shoulder, Peter rides to the Daily Bugle to find out if they've heard anything about Doc Ock. And they haven't heard anything, but Peter gets to meet Robbie Robertson, the new city editor. He then rides to meet Gwen Stacy and MJ, who make some catty remarks at each other. And once the audience is reminded that they both exist, Peter remembers that his aunt has a new boarder and rides away to see her instead. He arrives to find his aunt sitting down for tea with his enemy, Dr. Octopus. He immediately points a finger and states the obvious: this man is a criminal. But Aunt May chides him for being rude to their guest, and Doc Ock takes him aside to offer a quiet threat. Behave, young man, or the old lady gets it. Peter thinks about taking the doctor down now, using his spider strength, but worries that the shock of the fight might kill his aunt, and so he waits until nightfall. Outside, and now in costume, Spider-Man feels helpless. He can't attack without endangering his aunt. But when some henchmen arrive with a delivery, Spidey is forced to act. He shines his spider signal into Doc Ock's room, announcing that Spider-Man is alive, and hopes to draw Doc Ock out of the house. But the Doctor doesn't take the bait. Instead, he calls his henchmen, who arrive and attack our hero outside of Aunt May's house. Spider-Man fights a group of them with ease, even surviving a gas attack that almost knocks him out. By the time he has won, he has drawn a crowd eager to see what is going on, including his Aunt May, which means that the house is empty enough to attack. And so he does, smashing through the window with dramatic effect. But Dr. Octopus is ready, and he wraps Spider-Man up in his tentacles. By pretending that he's knocked out, Spider-Man is able to get close enough to Doc Ock to deliver a punch. But the fight, before it even begins, is interrupted by a scream. Aunt May has walked in to see that the nice doctor is being attacked by Spider-Man, and she instantly faints. Doc Ock grabs his suitcase and smashes through the wall of the house to escape and to show off his power, while Spider-Man rips off his mask to show his aunt that Spider-Man is not scary, he's not something to be feared, he's just Peter. But she doesn't wake. Peter calls the doctor and he waits, crestfallen and full of guilt. Thankfully, the doctor tells him that she'll recover, that she just needs time and rest. And while she does, Peter looks at that hole in his wall, the sign from Doc Ock to show how strong he is. And he swears to the heavens that he'll show the doctor how his might is nothing, just nothing, compared to the might of an angry Spider-Man. Not Brand Echh issue 4. While Hoggy Nelson is aggressively flirting with Karen Rage, Splat Murdoch is deep in thought. That's right, those names mean we're in parody territory again. So Splat also loves Miss Rage, but he's got to remain casual and nonchalant to keep his secret identity as Daredevil a secret. But since that's the only reason he isn't winning over Miss Rage, he decides to quit. Rather than just quitting though, he wants an enemy to unmask him, so he calls up Electrico and arranges a meetup, then dons his costume one last time, only to fall out of a window because he forgot that there wasn't a building to swing from. Meanwhile and elsewhere, Electrico is waiting and curious about what Daredevil will say, when Daredevil himself smashes through a window. The hero instantly quits and surrenders to Electrico, telling the villain to unmask him, but Electrico isn't stupid. This is some kind of trap. It has to be. Daredevil pleads with him. It's definitely real. He definitely wants to quit and be unmasked. But Electrico just zaps him, sure that the mask must be booby-trapped or something. When Daredevil offers to take off his mask himself, Electrico says that he won't even look. He'll close his eyes. He doesn't care who Daredevil is. So Daredevil decides to tie himself up with his own cable to prove that it isn't a trap, but Electrico just picks him up and throws him out of a window. Daredevil survives after flexing his way out of the cable and decides that he must be able to find someone, anyone who will unmask him. But we cut to 10 years later and no one has. So Daredevil decides to take matters into his own hands. He'll unmask himself in front of a crowd of strangers and Spider-Man, which is why we're here, and win the heart of Karen Rage, who seems to be with Hoggy now. Karen asks Hoggy if he's worried about the unmasking, and he isn't. After all, a lot can happen in 10 years. And he's right, as Daredevil pulls off his mask to reveal a completely bald Splat Murdoch, no longer the heartthrob he once was. Marvel Storybook Annual Issue 1. A department store is on fire, the 4th in the last month, and Peter Parker joins the crowd of onlookers. Most are looking up in terror at the blaze, except for one man, an insurance salesman who works for Phoenix Insurance, who is busy signing people up to fire insurance policies. Suddenly, the crowd screams when they spot a security guard still in the building. The firefighters can't reach him, and he refuses to jump, and so Peter Parker ducks into an alley to save the day as Spider-Man. He crawls across to the building along a wire and grabs the security guard, now unconscious, handing him down to the firefighters below. Then, before the roof can collapse, he swings away from the fire and to safety. But over the next week, Peter can't get the fire out of his mind. Why would an insurance salesman know to be there? When he spots a light go on at the Phoenix Insurance building, he swings over to investigate and overhears a conversation between that salesman and 3 arsonists who he has paid to start fires. Hearing enough, Spider-Man climbs through the window and webs up the criminals, webbing them to the outside of the building for the police to find. By the time the police arrive, the men all admit to everything and go to prison for a long time. Amazing Spider-Man issue 55. Spider-Man is tearing all over town searching for Dr. Octopus. He arrives at one of the Doctor's secret bases and handily defeats his purple-clad henchman before Doc Ock appears on a TV screen. The Doctor isn't hiding, he's preparing a major plan, and one that Spider-Man will never be able to stop. Left frustrated that the Doctor is a video screen away, Spider-Man wrecks the place and leaves. Although he does check the secret underwater base where he last fought Doc Ock and finds nothing but water. But he best be getting home to see how his aunt is feeling after her fainting spell last issue. Meanwhile and elsewhere, a security council is being led by John Jameson. They're deciding what to do with the nullifier that Dr. Octopus tried to steal 2 issues back. To keep it safe, they're going to store the device at one of Tony Stark's factories, and everything is being done to make it safe against a Doc Ock attack, and against a Spider-Man attack too. Even though Jameson is convinced that Spidey is a good guy, we leave them as they're going through the details of the plan, unaware that Dr. Octopus has a mole in the room. Back with Peter Parker, and he is taking care of his aunt, with the help of Aunt Anna, who keeps reassuring May that it's not her fault that there's a giant hole in the wall of the house. Giant hole? That's exactly what MJ would love to see. So Peter takes her to the damage room, and she makes jokes, while Peter worries about the insurance. When Gwen arrives to offer help, MJ is still making jokes. "Isn't she ever serious?" Peter asks. "More often than she'd have you suspect," says Gwen. But we leave that glimpse into MJ's personal life to race across town to the convoy that is moving the nullifier to its final destination. When an ordinary maintenance van starts to slow up ahead, the convoy also cuts its speed, wary of attack. But they don't expect an attack from below, from the sewers, where Dr. Octopus's arms reach up and pull the security detail from the convoy. Doc Ock rises up, and with gas grenades and his powerful arms smashing shut the doors of the agents' cars, he makes his way through the convoy and retrieves his prize, the nullifier. He leaves nothing but broken cars in his wake and is gone into the night. Minutes later, the security detail is stunned, figuring out what happened to them. Jonah is on the scene with his reporters, ready to blame Spider-Man. Maybe Doc Ock is Spider-Man in disguise, but his son shoots the idea down. Above the fray, Spider-Man watches the whole thing go down. Everyone is here, the army, the police, the FBI, maybe even S.H.I.E.L.D., but no one has a clue where to find Doc Ock. But Spider-Man might. Instead of hiding, he reckons that the Doctor will want to flaunt his new power at the most important factory on the East Coast, Stark Industries. And he's right. Doc Ock pulls up to the factory, makes some adjustments to the nullifier, and activates it. One guard tries to call for backup, and another tries to shoot the Doctor, but the nullifier stops them both pistol and phone. Doc Ock gloats. He is supreme. The world will be his. Well, not if Spider-Man has anything to say about it. Spidey swings down and ties up the Doctor's arms, but Doc Ock remains stable and bats our hero away. Spider-Man tries to web Doc's eyes like he did previously, but the Doctor dodges and then uses his arms to shield, and then knocks Spidey across the ground. Before Spider-Man can recover, Doc Ock grabs the nullifier and fires it at our hero. Spidey reels and almost falls unconscious. When Spider-Man wakes, he has no memory of who he is, who this octopus guy is, or why he's wearing this silly costume. Unbeknownst to anybody here, the nullifier reacted with the radioactivity in Spidey's blood, causing him to lose his memories. Doc Ock is quick to take advantage, telling Spider-Man that they're teammates actually, that he just had a little accident. But the two of them are working together to commit the crime of the century. And Spider-Man has no choice but to believe him. Not Brand Echh issue 5. There's a new hero in town who is taking down the Black Knight and tying up Mr. Hide-and-Seek and freezing the Crafty Cobra. And it's not anybody you could expect, like Richard Nixon or Woody Allen or Santa Claus. No, it's Forbush Man, available for weddings, graduations and bar mitzvahs. And here's his origin story. Irving Forbush worked at Marvel Comics, doing all the work that no one else wanted to do, like feeding Lockjaw, or getting spare parts for Iron Man, or making all the sound effects for the comics. In his spare time, his only hobby is getting autographs from superheroes, but he's yet to get a single one. The Human Scorch is too busy running away from Smokey the Bear, he mistakes a fish for Triton, and Slick Silver is just way too quick. And so he goes home to his Aunt Mayhem to do the dishes and long to be a superhero. A superhero, Aunt Mayhem cries. You're always talking about these blasted superheroes. And she smashes a pot on his head. And that gives him an idea. Oh, and also Spider-Man is in the background, and that's why we're here. In his secret lab, Irving makes eye holes in the pan and then steals some pajamas and cuts up a blue potato sack, and he becomes Forbush Man. Now he just needs a villain to fight. As he searches for one in a newspaper, he's completely unaware that people are fleeing from the Juggernaut. He's also completely unaware that the Juggernaut spots him and chases him down, but crashes into a bus stop and then falls into some cement. He's only aware when people start chasing him down, asking for his autograph or his costume or a kiss. Being a hero isn't all it's cracked up to be, and Forbush Man hides in a bin to get away. But since he technically defeated Juggernaut, all the other villains are surrendering, so there's no room in jail, and no one knows who is really responsible. Not even Irving, who ends our story facing out into the night, ready to be a hero again when the creators get around to writing it. Topps Crazy Little Comics issue 1. In the mid-1960s, Topps, who were a bubblegum company, decided to create a bunch of parody comic books. They went all out with creatives. Future Marvel editor Roy Thomas wrote them, Wally Wood drew them, and they even had parody ads on the back that were drawn by Art Spiegelman, who would go on to win a Pulitzer Prize for Mouse. Their logic was that because they were parody, that they were fair use and they wouldn't get sued. They were wrong. The comics were never officially released, but rare copies are available for sale out in the world, so they clearly got very far in the production process. And since they were planned to release in 1967, well, look at them now. Craven, or Raven in this comic, is robbing a bank when the lights of the amusing Spider Guy falls on him. Spider Guy wraps the foe up and carries him away while the police gossip about this superhero. Some say he's a teenager who was bitten by a radioactive spider. Some say he has the strength of a spider and can crawl on a wall like a spider. But Spider Guy gets back to his typical teenage room and dismisses the rumors. There's nothing weird about him except for his uncomfortable costume. And so he takes it off, revealing that underneath he's just a spider who was bitten by a radioactive teenage boy. Topps Crazy Little Comics Issue 3. As mentioned in the last video, these parody issues were created by a bubblegum company, Topps, who thought that they wouldn't get sued because parody. They were wrong, and the books were never officially released, but they exist out in the world, so here we are. The Fantastic Fear, made up of Mr. Fearful, the Invisible Pearl, Thingamabob, and the Fuming Torch, have noticed that crime seems to be down. But they soon realise why. The sky is teeming with superheroes, including our pal Spider Guy. The Fearful Four can't even move without getting tangled up in other heroes. When they learn that the DC heroes are also moving to New York, they decide to take action. They'll show the world what any self-respecting heroes do when invaded. They retire to Bermuda. Captain Action and Action Boy Issue 1. It's Jimmy's birthday, and he's getting the toy that he's been asking for, Captain Action, with all of the costumes and accessories. Included in the box is a Videomatic ring, and Jimmy just has to turn his finger and Captain Action will become a superhero. And so he does, and then he falls asleep. Captain Action is sitting in his base when he sees a mysterious mist approach. If only he had some way to get above it, to see the cause. Lucky for him, he has the Power Pack, sold separately, and he flies up to see the cause is rockets. The rockets are being fired by enemies, using the mist to disguise their attack, and Captain Action uses his jet mortar, sold separately, to surprise them. Then he uses his directional communicator, sold separately, to warn Earth of the invasion. Before help can arrive, Captain Action decides that the best way to scare away these invaders is by making it look like they're up against multiple heroes. They've seen Captain Action, but they haven't seen Batman, sold separately. As Batman, he swings onto a rocket, opens it up, and puts it out of business. Then, as Buck Rogers, sold separately, he uses a solar gun, and as Flash Gordon, sold separately, he uses a ray pistol, and he takes out more of the rockets. But he's suddenly and magnetically pulled from his base and up into the sky. Luckily, he has a working parachute, sold separately, to save him, and then he thinks it's time for the invaders to meet another superhero, Superman, sold separately. But while he's halted some of the attack, Captain Action needs help to beat back the full invasion. Back on Earth, Captain Action arms a bunch of men with his weapons arsenal, sold separately, and with a survival kit, sold separately. And then he becomes Captain America, sold separately, to take the fight to the aliens on the land. And then he becomes Steve Canyon, sold separately, to take the fight to the aliens in the air. And then he becomes Aquaman, sold separately, to take the fight to the aliens at sea. And then he's the Green Hornet, sold separately, and he shoots some aliens. And then he's the Phantom, sold separately, and he kicks the aliens out of their tank. And then he's the Lone Ranger, sold separately, to fight them some more. And then he's Tonto, sold separately, to also shoot them. And then he's Spider-Man, sold separately, webbing the aliens up. But he's not the only costume-changing hero on the scene, as Action Boy enters the fight. He turns into Superboy, sold separately, and throws a lion at the aliens. And then Robin, sold separately, to kick them. And then Aqualad, sold separately, to just tip them out of a rowboat. And I guess the rowboat did it because all of the aliens flee back into space and Jimmy wakes up. It was all a dream. But the good news is that with just his imagination and his 2 action figures and all those many additional sets, he can make that dream into a reality. He just needs to buy Captain Action. Thanks for watching and making it all the way to the end. If you haven't seen it already, there's already compilations of 1963 through to 1966, and individual issues are being recapped every Thursday as we enter 1968.